Hey folks, welcome to Unsung Podcast. My name is Mark. I am joined by
Paul. Paul Anner.
Paul Anner?
Paul Anner.
Paul Anner.
new sponsor.
New sponsor. Second sponsor of this podcast.
Unsung Podcast. Who's the first one?
It's the Variety Bar.
Where's my share?
It's the Variety Bar, of course.
Variety Bar in Glasgow. You join us in the bowels of Variety Bar in Glasgow.
It truly is the
in
bowels.
The No Mean Radio studio.
Yeah, glad to be here. Glad to record in such lovely climes.
My namesake.
Pauliner.
Christopher Pauliner.
Is Paul your middle name?
Paul is my middle name.
Wow.
Good Catholic middle name.
Not anymore, it's Pauliner.
Yeah, exactly. Aye. It's like, you know, that woman that sold the casino tattoo on her head.
Yeah.
I sold my middle name to Pauliner.
They should do that as a
Didn't
thing.
have to change my initials or anything. It's perfect.
That's perfect.
Who are you going to get? What's your middle name?
David.
David.
Aye.
Mark. Diatsu.
Japanese car brand. Nice.
Diatsu Fraser. I can see you now. Windows down.
Tiny little car.
Tiny little car. Anyway. Unsung Podcast. Go and sponsor us, please. Your way of sponsoring us, we will not change our name to your name.
No.
But you can subscribe and we'll give you other benefits that are not our middle names.
Yes.
What are those benefits?
They are, if you join us at our lowest tier, which is £4 a month, early access to episodes. You also get to chat to us, which I think is a perk.
Sort of.
A perk. I think it's a perk.
You'll be given access to the AAA group. The AAA group is where it's at for the podcast. We take suggestions of episodes that we could cover. We take feedback, both hostile and supportive.
Yeah, we actually do as well. Like,
yeah, we do.
We
take it on the chin. We talk a lot of shit in here. We've got to be able to take it. We've tried to get Biffy Clyro's tour manager onto that group.
It's not happened.
He just prefers to beef on the old Musk box.
The Musk box.
But yeah, that's the lowest tier. What's up for that?
If you go up to that, you've got £15 a month, and that's where
it's quite an investment.
That's where they really play. Aye.
You know, that's a big undertaking. But for that £15
at that tier,
you're treating yourself.
Yeah,
because you get an album every month curated by us as part of our record club. We go and we buy records from excellent bands that it's very unlikely you'll cross paths with, and the money goes to the bands, the money goes to the labels, independent labels, keeps them in business or helps them pay off their debt, whichever one applies, and you're also helping to fund us. It's a really big old healthy ecology. It is, yes. It's a good ecosystem. We enjoy just talking to these folks and and sharing their music with you. So yeah, do that. Patreon.com/unsungpod. If you're on the YouTube channel, please like, share and subscribe. The subscribe button is down here. Hit it. I hear that. Yeah. So what are we doing this week, Chris? Well, you should tell us because it's your choice this week, Mark. Yeah. So this week we are doing Marked for Death, the third album by Emma Ruth Rundle. That'd be like your if you were like a tagger in the streets, it would be Marked for Death. Marked for Death. I am for death. I was recently told on a holiday that I speak about death too much. So, really? Yeah. You're surprised by that. Who are you on holiday with that was telling you that? People you know. That does check out then. Yeah. And somebody else that speaks about death quite a lot is Emma Ruth Rundle. Emma Ruth Rundle. Yeah. So this week I decided to do this record because I think we've actually spoken about in our chat. I think Emma Ruth Rundle first got mooted for an episode about 5 years ago. Yes. But just the way it lined up, like we'd done Chelsea Wolf, we didn't want to do it too soon to that, and there was just, various things came along and it always kept getting sort of kicked down the road. Nothing against her. But it felt right to do it this time. It did, and so we bring it to you this week. This is from 2016. This is from 2016, this record, yeah. I do believe you described it as, I had quite a good time listening to it. I mean, that was relatively speaking. That was your big sales pitch, and I was like, having listened to it, I'm like, you did? I think I enjoyed it as maybe a good... I mean, I'm a dark... I talk about death too much, apparently, so I'm a dark person. Absolutely. But yeah, having now done the research for this podcast is actually a bit of lore to this record, which is... Is this the first time you've ever had twice as many notes as me? No.
Jay Dilla.
No, yeah, maybe
significantly more than pretty much anybody else in that episode. No, I think she's an interesting character. She's actually had quite a deep and long career, which I think a lot of people might not necessarily realise.
True.
And I think there's a lot to mine here. There's a few things you want to speak about. There's a couple of things I want to speak about, and I think we can actually make a good fist of this. One thing that I'm quite aware of, though, is that last week we did a post-rock band, and she has actually played in a post-rock band. But I think a lot of her textures and tones actually could easily fall into that category as well.
Well, actually, her band got name-checked on last week's episode, I believe.
Yeah, so it's a kind of interesting and maybe fun synergy between the two episodes, but there's nothing much fun about Emma Ruth Rundle's topics in her music, shall we say.
I mean, basics on this artist. Born in Los Angeles, a place that's much in the news right now.
Santa Monica, specifically.
Santa Monica. I don't believe it's Santa Monica that is currently at the heart of the scuffles.
The scuffles.
I mean, 99% of LA is just going about its business.
Yeah, it's a big fucking city.
The Trump administration would not have you believe that. But it would basically be like, no, it's fallen into the sea, and only King Donald is keeping it afloat. But no, she was born in LA in 1983. Her dad was, I believe, a jazz pianist.
That's correct. Her mother was a bass player.
Really?
Yeah.
Like a stand-up, like do kind of bass.
Yeah.
Or like a sit-down, like dum 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 dum.
I think it was
that's kind of stand-up.
I think it was,
as well.
Yeah.
It's called stand-up.
Stand-up or both. Yeah, she played the bass. I imagine if her dad was a piano player, she probably played the stand-up bass.
Have you seen piano player? Because it sounds less like penis.
I don't like penises. No, I just
pianists. That's the plural.
I know. I think maybe someday when I was younger.
No, pianistes.
Pianistes. I like all the pianistes. I think maybe someday
that's going to get clipped.
Yeah, that's
clipped and shared.
There's probably something from my childhood about saying the word pianist, which
why you're averse to pianists.
Somebody laughed at me for using the word pianist and never having to use it ever again. You know,
you would think there'd be a lot of words off your
there's a lot
palette then.
There's a lot of trauma this week, you know what I mean? So we're gonna get into that.
So Emma Ruth Rundle started, believe it or not, on Celtic harp. I believe her mother took her into a music store and said, "What do you want to learn?"
Yeah.
To be fair, she pointed at the coolest looking instrument in the room.
Cool instrument.
She later moved on to guitar. I think 3 or 4 years later. She spent a year in New Zealand a little bit later in her life.
Oh, hang on a second.
And then returned to LA to get into the music scene. Are you going to flesh out the...
I'm going to flesh out the story a little bit, yeah. So, you know, she actually moved to guitar when she was 12. And she started working in a shop called McCabe's Guitar Shop, which is quite a legendary shop in California because of its folk roots, which is quite pertinent to her oeuvre, I suppose. In an interview with Paramount Guitar, she said that it's a historically important music shop, and it's been there for 55 years. It was in 2015 she did this interview, so it's been there for now 65 years. She started going there when she was 8 years old, which is mad.
That's when she picked out the Celtic harp.
But it was also a store. It was also a school. The store was also a school as well.
Right, okay.
And that's when she said she was surrounded by the best of the best players. Never having real guitar lessons, but she just picked up what she could. And her first and only real job was in this shop, like helping people pick guitars and fix guitars and all that. And she said that she really learned from a guy called Pete Steinberg, who's a very well-known folk guitar player. And yeah, she kind of started learning from him and then just like moved into learning shit by tabs and all that, which I guess we've done. And she calls her style of playing a bastardized finger style, using her nails to pick. So yeah, quite interesting that like getting immersed in folk at such a young age clearly had a massive impact on her, because there's still elements of that in her sound even at this day.
Aye. My main question this week, maybe to reflect on some of the kind of grim themes and general sense of pessimism in the air, is Emma Ruth Rundle gothy? Maybe even gothic rock at points. So we have friends in common, some of whom might think you talk about death too often, who are also Emma Ruth Rundle fans. And just as we do during the week, people are like, what are you doing this week? And they bump into you and you're like, oh, this is what we're doing. Turns out one of them's a big fan, and we got into a wee bit of a debate is to overstate it.
A set to
tete-a-tete. Because I think she's goth. And I mean, basically, I'm sure she'll concede that by the end of the argument, I was proven right. As most arguments I find myself getting into. But no, I think she's quite gothy, but I do need to qualify that because it's pretty clear that it's not goth in many senses,
But what I realised was the more I dug into this, I was trying to articulate what I was getting at during that conversation, and I had to go and look it up and be like, what's the terminology? What is this phase of goth? What is that? And it's very obvious that there's a very good mixtape waiting to be done. Not just a mixtape on classic goth, because I think there's a lot of that out there, but a mixtape that encompasses the very kind of modern manifestations of it, which clearly it's one of those genres that people are very protective about. So I thought perhaps we can sort of set the mood here by having a very quick conversation about what I mean when I say goth in relation to this music. Are you okay with that?
Are you going back to Sisters of Mercy and Fields of Nephilim and
without being exhaustive, because I do think there's a really good mixtape waiting to happen.
There's a great one.
Yeah, yeah. Sure. Mm-hmm. Just to kind of get it, let's just whet the appetite here for people who are listening who might want to come back and hear that mixtape, right? There is going to be a wee bit of drama here because, as I say, it's bound to be divisive. But I do think
goth, it's dramatic.
Yeah, we need to raise the issue though. So no deep dives, but the origins of the term 101. I mean, you can go back to I think the Doors were the first band ever called goth rock. The End in particular was referred to in a review. I don't know, maybe Rolling Stone or something at the time. You've got people like Nico and the Velvet Underground. Venus and Furs is very gothic.
Shiny, shiny, shiny boots of leather, whiplash, girl child in the dark.
You've got, and also the themes of that, S&M, bondage, that kind of thing. You've got people like Alice Cooper. There's all this kind of like proto-goth kind of period. Now the problem with that is sometimes you can just sort of you can project onto things and be like, oh, that was goth. I mean, people go all the way back to some stuff that Nina Simone did and say it's very early goth. We'll save that for the mixtape. Suffice to say, the coming together, the coalescing of a goth sound tends to be attributed to Bela Lugosi's Dead, the single by Bauhaus.
Bela Lugosi's dead. The bats have left the bell tower. The victims have been bled. Red velvet lines, the black box.
There are songs prior to that sound gothic. You've got Susie and the Banshees and all that kind of stuff. But that track, and I think the themes of it and the whole kind of aesthetic of it, the artwork and all that, it tends to, just congeal the whole thing in one place. Now, Emma Ruth Rundle doesn't sound like that. She doesn't sound like Joy Division. She doesn't sound like Susie. She doesn't sound like the track Shadow of Love by The Damned, who then, as they progressed as a band, they got quite gothic. Doesn't sound like Sisters of Mercy, who you mentioned. Bands like Specimen. She doesn't sound like Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, one of their big singles. Doesn't sound like the March Violets.
Statues moving in the ballroom, on the dance floor all is bright. Vicious sins of gentle folk. Out of the horse, that's a joke. Find your picture in the mirror.
Doesn't sound like Fields of the Nephilim. Doesn't sound like The Birthday Party, them again, for 2 weeks ago. Doesn't sound like Christian Death and Death Rock. So what is she? And I think goth definitely evolves. I think the musical scope of even the bands I just listed widens over time. It starts as quite basically coming out of like post-punk, and it's got quite a specific sound. The bass comes to the fore. There's lots of chorus. There's lots of reverb. There's generally quite a baritone vocal.
There is one thing as well, and that's sex.
Sex?
Yeah, like all the goth bands are sexy, and there's a lot of like attitude around sex to the swagger of their music.
Yeah, I guess that ties in with the Venus and Furs thing as well. There's a bit of eroticism around it.
Totally.
And the music slows down a bit as well, because having come from punk, it does start to get darker and stompier. And by the 1990s, you're getting into grunge, and the elements do start to combine with the kind of sludgier end of grunge. You've got a thing called the Peaceville 3 as well, which is Paradise Lost, My Dying Bride, and the band Anathema. So they were signed to Peaceville Records in the UK, and they started off playing this kind of like metal. They were a legit metal band. Paradise Lost, for example, go for legit metal, to an album called Draconian Times in the early 90s. and then on to an album called 1 Second in 1997. And by that point, they're making huge baroque power ballads almost. But they've got like a grungy guitar sound, big earnest thing with loads of reverb. But when you look at their visuals, it's got a kind of like Dracula-esque Gothic element to it, and they've brought all this kind of medieval kind of imagery along for the ride with them. So they've kind of melted all that stuff together, and they weren't the only ones. So around about that time, you had bands like Catatonia, Cradle of Filth,
Cradle of Filth,
Tiamat as well. They all start to kind of like lean into this Gothic kind of obsession. Front women became a big thing. Big haunting vocals started to appear. There's a Norwegian band called Theatre of Tragedy who are pretty significant. I'm pretty sure they'll come up when we do a mixtape in more detail. But they started mixing sort of deathy growls with ethereal female lead vocals, and that's basically a precursor to everything from albums like Mariner, Bejeweled Christmas, and Cult of Luna collaborated to the Thou Rundle collaboration we'll talk about today. It's also known as Beauty and the Beast rock at the time. I'm sure you can imagine why. Which is kind of baroque in itself. Playing into dark fairy tales. They all dabble with a mixture of medieval architecture in some of the covers and things, and they've got like Shelley Stoker-esque classic horror themes. And music, as I said, is dripping in reverb and loads of like minor key flourishes and crescendos. So Gothic rock's kind of sneered at by OG Goth, so that's what I'm saying. It'll probably be divisive. There'll be a lot of people like, it's fucking no, you're way off the map. And fair enough, right? But I do argue that there's a continuity there. Just because people get territorial about labels, I mean, see hardcore, how many times have we quibbled over definitions of them, various manifestations of hardcore? It doesn't mean a sound doesn't exist and the label doesn't fit just because you want to be protective of it. So yeah, I mean, musically, there may be miles between Emma Ruth Rundle and, say, Joy Division, but thematically and aesthetically, I think there's a fair bit in common. So maybe a lazy abbreviated timeline, as I say. You've got bands like Celtic Frost as well, who started fucking about with like mixing Sabbath and Bauhaus flavours and doing like singing bits and clean guitars. You get Fields of the Nephilim through Typo Negative, who started slowing stuff down, bringing in all these power chords. And you got a band who we've not mentioned yet, like The Gathering, a Dutch band, who take almost like an 80s ballad approach into 90s grunge, especially with a huge female lead vocal, brilliant singer in that band, or two singers actually, but the original one in particular. And they add a lot of minor key melodrama. And when you combine those, I think you end up at bands like Him and Evanescence. And are they not Gothic? I mean, I think Evanescence make a pretty good case for being quite Gothic when you see the themes and the artwork and the videos and, even just the demeanour, the corsets, all that kind of stuff.
I think people of...
It's not a ridiculous suggestion.
I think people of our generation would be okay with that.
Yeah, clearly, yeah. I think the OG people will be gagging.
Aye, but the OG people are also old as fuck and don't like change. So
some of them are followers of the pod. So
yeah, I stand by that comment.
To take it one step further, and this is where things got contentious with our mutual friend, I think there's a goth pop movement from the 2010s. I think, from Chelsea Wolfe through to Billie Eilish. And Billie Eilish, when you look at some of her photo shoots with like the pure white sort of contact lenses and she's got some really dark imagery in some of her photography in particular. Even Rihanna, she got Christoph Speidel to do her logo for her album. People start flirting with this kind of metal and goth kind of imagery.
You could put Fever Rain there as well.
Absolutely, yeah. So stylistically, the one that was most contentious is I would make the case that even early Lana Del Rey is probably the furthest most marker of goth pop in terms of into mainstream. So
would that not be Lord?
I think there's a case to be made there as well, honestly. Like, I think it's maybe an element of Southern Gothic as well, as opposed to sort of like European Gothic. But you take like, the titles of albums, Born to Die, Ultraviolence, there's a kind of, for a pop act, there's a really strange bias towards very dark imagery.
Choose your last words, this is the last time, 'cause you and I We were born to die.
And she's certainly veered away for these sounds since, but I do feel there was crossover. And I think for a lot of people who are fans of heavy music, Lana Del Rey almost represents the closest they'll get to pop music. They will go that far and no further. And I think she straddles that border, if you will. Same coming the other way. So, for pop fans who have like record collections of Taylor Swift and Katy Perry and stuff, they will probably go, in a lot of cases, as far as Lana Del Rey. And that's kind of the darkest and kind of creepiest and weirdest they'll get. So I think there's, whether we like it or not, there has been a creep. It's a nice metaphor for goth stuff. But there has been a creep in terms of the influence, and it's seeped out because it's a desirable aesthetic. I think it's quite a compelling thing. It adds a sort of emotional weight, and people get very invested in it. So my point, I suppose, is I'm sure we agree that Chelsea Wolfe, for example, courts many elements of goth, right? Visually as well as thematically.
I don't think there's anything. I would argue. Sorry, I guess I might be skewing your point a little bit here. I'd argue that both these artists fall into a gothic realm. Like Emma Ruth Rundle is clearly Southern Gothic to begin with, and then leans into what Gothic actually means. Both thematically and when she gets heavier. Also musically as well, Chelsea Wolfe, I think there is, if you want to call Depeche Mode gothy, then the last Chelsea Wolfe record is definitely in that electro gothic mode as well. So
goth rock also was a form of music that started to incorporate keyboards. It's like gothic metal,
totally
incorporated keyboards, and I think bands like Depeche Mode were incredibly influential on gothic metal bands.
I think it would be really hard to argue that they're not gothic for a large part of their career.
Yeah, absolutely. So. Same thing goes for Chelsea Wolfe. She's got albums called Abyss, Pain is Beauty, Apocalypsis, The Birth of Violence, like really dark themes.
In my view, there is no denying the fact she's goth.
Yeah, I know, but I'm just trying
to
leans
into it, whereas I don't think Emma Ruth Rundle quite does.
Well, in a legalese way, I'm trying to sort of build a case here, because Chelsea Wolfe and Emma Ruth Rundle are musical bedfellows as well,
and friends,
and collaborators. Yeah. And the Emma Ruth Rundle albums, you look at Marked for Death, On Dark Horses, The Helm of Sorrow, Engine of Hell. I think there's a lot of the same things at play in her album titles, and that kind of bias towards the dark side that Chelsea Wolfe exhibits. So I think there's a lot of parallels there.
I doubt she'd disagree with you. I don't think she'd disagree with you.
But I think a lot of people would. So I just wanted to make this case without getting too painstaking, without getting into the history of goth rock and post-punk and all that kind of stuff. I just suggest that Emma Ruth Rundle is still in many ways channeling elements of gothic sound and aesthetics. Any goths getting the rage here, you're not alone. But just imagine what it feels like for punks to be told that Good Charlotte counts as punk, and for metalheads try to work out if they're listening to Sleep Token or fucking Ed Sheeran. Okay, so fucking fight me. I think I made a decent case there, okay? But I think Emma Ruth Rundle is, in a way, a kind of goth pop.
I mean, given the themes of our music, and as we'll go through the records and the things in which they've come from, the pain, the very real pain in a lot of places, I think if you're getting hung up on that, you need to really assess what you think goth in general means.
I think you know what goths are like, though.
Yeah, I know. My girlfriend is one.
I know, exactly.
She loves Emma Ruth Rundle and she loves Chelsea Wolfe. Do you know what I mean? So those things are. I like the fact you've laid out this argument.
No, we're not disputing.
Yeah,
I think others.
I think it's absurd. Frankly, I think it's an absurd
but
thing.
Others, no, I guarantee you, others will be. As I've found out. So, yeah, that's my case. But we talk about some of our other projects, because this is another thing I discovered, is that some fans of Emma Ruth Rundle are unaware of some of the other things that she's done. I mean, because that's that thing. If you use streaming primarily as well, you'll only get what's streamed under that artist's catalogue, unless you know to go and look specifically under other titles. And I'll be honest, I didn't know half of these as well until now.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea to do that, because all of them inform the musical direction she's taken. And if you want to think traditionally goth, there's one project which she's done only one record for, which I think is very of that post-punky era in a lot of ways, and we'll get to that in due course.
I mean, we'll start with the earliest one though, the Nocturnes, which, I mean, in itself, that name's very gothic, but it's not actually the most gothic sounding in music. So I mentioned earlier on that she went to New Zealand for a year and came back to LA to get involved in music. And so the Nocturnes released the Wellington EP, which I'm assuming is to do with Wellington, New Zealand, and not the rubber boots, because that would not be very Gothic. There's an album called A Year of Spring in 2009. There's an album, I get the name here, Aokigahara.
Yes,
Aokigahara from 2011. Much more country infused, slower in pace with loads of reverb. I think it's actually quite dream poppy. Stuff.
I can give you some. I listen to all this stuff in preparation, so I can give you some insight. If that is what if that's what the people demand, then that is what we can get. So when she came back from New Zealand, she actually went to Cal Arts to study music, and then she left for a year and decided to devote herself to live music. That was 2007, and then she formed the Nocturnes the same year, and she described it as folk gaze with elements of chamber pop, goth, folk gaze, wow. Chamber pop, goth, and post rock. All of those are probably, by some degrees, accurate.
Chamber pop goth is contrived, but also quite nice.
Yeah. They released, like you said, released 2 albums, 1 EP. A Year of Spring is actually quite interesting. A couple of the songs on it, particularly the songs Paper Hands and Trojan, are probably the standouts, and they actually portend the way she would write music as time would go on, which I think is really interesting in and of itself. The second record, Aokigahara, which is actually named after the Sea of Trees in Japan, which is, as we English-speaking folk also know it as, the Suicide Forest.
Yeah. That makes sense.
This is definitely what you would probably call folk gaze, if that's even a genre, but it sounds like, to me, it sounds like a mixture of folk and shoegaze.
Well, yeah, I think that's implied.
A lot of the vocals in a lot of those songs are shared by the other singer-guitarist, Julian Rifkin. Pretty much all the songs in that record are dual-vocaled, and I don't think it really works as much for her as it does maybe for him. It's got a really depressed Celtic feel, I think, which harkens back to her past and the Celtic harp. There's one song on that, The Road, which I thought was quite decent, because some interesting guitar stuff, but for the most part it's like dreary folky stuff with like loads of effects and post-rocky guitar bits on it, and it's not super compelling to my ear, if I'm totally honest.
So the band that we name-checked last week was Red Sparrows. Red Sparrows formed 2003, affiliated with things like Neurosis and that. It was a side project for various people, including Brian Mayer and Jeff Kashid.
Yeah, the main dude, ISIS. Brian Mayer, the main dudes of ISIS,
Yeah. So the album Every Heart Shines Towards the Red Sun, 2006, I think, was my main inroad into Red Sparrows. I think I've seen them twice, maybe. And actually, I think I've seen them with Emma Ruth Rundle, sorry. I didn't realise it. They toured with Nick Cave, so there's some goth points there for Red Sparrows. She joined them in 2011 when Brendan Tobin left the band. She was only in the band for just under a year.
2010.
Oh, she joined 2010,
yeah,
right? So she was in the band for a year then, because it was, they went on hiatus in 2011. She was basically initiated into a metal scene. I mean, it's a pretty prestigious band to be in, you know, like very looked up to, that also had a lot of dark gothy overtones as well. I mean, touring with Nick Cave and things like that. So the band actually reformed. I mean, say they went on hiatus in 2011. They reformed to do a road burn in 2020 that was curated by her but never happened because we think COVID.
She did a few things in 2020, to be fair, so I think she actually came out okay in the end of it. I think
she kept herself busy in the house. Now I am guessing that maybe the band you were referring to earlier on is what she did next. So it was following Red Sparrows hiatus, she went on to a kind of side project with another Red Sparrows member called Greg Burns, and it was called Marriages. That was formed in 2011 in Los Angeles. I think from 2012, a guy called Andrew Klinko joined.
He was the drummer in the Nocturnes.
Aye, and he went on to found a band called Drab Majesty.
Oh, really?
So he's
goth band.
Exactly, super goth, but proper, like, they are like the modern reincarnation of the original goth
They're
movement.
fine. I've listened to them. They're all right.
I've seen them live. I wasn't actually very into it, but some people rate them very highly. Signed to Sargent House, same time as Death Heaven, so Marriages, that is. So that was kind of like a big moment for that kind of scene, progressive metal sort of stuff. Toured with Chelsea Wolf, toured with Death Heaven, toured with Russian Circles, did one EP and one album. The EP was in 2012, Kitsune. I think for me, it's somewhere between shoegaze, dream pop, and doom. The vocals on this EP are treated quite differently. They're often doubled and they're further back in the mix. She's basically, you can hear that she's not as assertive as a vocalist in this. I mean, she's still doing good takes, but she doesn't imbue the same character in her voice. It's much more of a flat, solid, like totally respectable, but flat vocal approach that she's got.
You get that in the Nocturnes as well, which is probably one of the reasons why I find that project less compelling. She also is in a much simpler vocal mode, you know. I think the strength of our solo stuff is that she often goes to a higher and sometimes falsetto pitch, and it actually makes it much more characterful.
I think with this one, she used a bunch of vocal processing on this EP, which they would actually drop when they did the album, which is quite significant. In terms of the EP itself, there's quite a lot of tracks in it, but the fifth one, White Shape, is about as out and out stoner doom as it gets. And the sixth one, Part the Dark, again, is, I think, a pretty good post-metal-esque anthemic closer. It's got a real ambition at the end of it.
Yeah, so do you know the story of that EP? How the band came about? So Red Sparrows were booked to play in a festival and they pulled out. So she basically pulled this band together out of thin air and wrote a set for them to fill their slot.
James.
And that set became that EP. That probably also explains why the album sounds so significantly different from the EP.
Yeah.
You know, it's much more alt-rocky. It definitely leans towards the goth. I think her vocal styling's a lot more gothy. It is post-punky in places as well.
Yeah.
Salome is the album 2015, which comes out after her first solo record. And there's clearly a huge difference. Well, two solo records technically.
Yeah.
There's a huge difference clearly in her vocals. She's a better singer. She's a lot more adept at bending the song to her will, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, post solo album, the vocal is leaned into way more in terms of delivery and the character. By the way, again, people stop me and be like, oh, what he's covering next time? Friend of the pod, Jamie Sturt, musician.
Big Jamie.
Immediately suggested this record as being our actual unsung classic. And I might add, Mark, he did so whilst wearing an Orion hoodie.
Oh, he's one of the very few people that have one.
Conflict of interest there.
I don't even have one of them. And I'm in the fucking band. But I don't think the record is that good.
So, to illustrate a wee bit, as I said, the processing is gone on the vocals. It's much more naked. It's much more about her performance and her character in her voice, which has come on leaps and bounds in terms of her confidence, given the solo project as well. The first track in it, I think The Liar, is a really interesting combo of like slide guitar, metal and dissonance. It's quite an interesting sound they've got. The record itself is sort of held together by a sort of Anna van Housewoolf vocal melodrama.
Yes.
We've covered that Anna van Housewoolf in the show before. She already had a couple of records out, and her third record, The Miraculous, was the same year, which is a big record for her. So I think you combine that with this, with Chelsea Wolf, with Emma Ruth Rundle's solo stuff, you could see that there was a real sound happening around about this time.
Oh, the Goths.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I mean, though. This kind of surge of like early to mid 2010s sort of gothic pop, alternative gothic pop. And the third one on it, Santa Sangre, has a real 80s flavour to the production in it. I think
it's a few songs with that.
There's a lot of huge reverb washes, and there's a lot of pop rock writing. Like, it does sound like something really quite commercial that has been produced in a way to make it almost less commercial. It strikes me that actually this album, I mean, I take your point. I don't think it's like the greatest of records, but it does strike me that it could be a hit with fans of hers and fans of this sound in general. And it's overlooked. Like, as I say, I was unaware of it. Our friends who like her were unaware of it. It seems to be one that is just a bit underreported. So if you are an existing Emma Ruth Rundle fan, look up Marriages, look up this record. There's a very high chance that you're going to enjoy this.
You're going to dig it, yeah.
I think it's musically and sonically fairly strong, and the project went quiet from 2015, so it's a little bit of a shame because it did seem like they were getting a bit more confident. There were some initial noises about doing music again, but those have since been sort of reversed. It doesn't seem likely that the project will reactivate, especially because, I mean, Drab Majesty have done well as well. So,
I mean, I didn't hate it. I would be interested to hear more from them. There are tracks on it I liked. I did like the Skin. I thought that was a good song. It also gave me an 80s feel. The title track, Salome and Less Than, both those songs are, I think, probably standouts for me as well. It is an interesting curio, and even though I said I didn't think it was that good, there was something about it, that kind of post-punkiness, which I seem to be getting more into as I'm getting older, weirdly, especially if it's got a female singer.
That does seem to be the way that you can appreciate it.
It kind of makes me go, maybe there is something there that I could get into. But I think they could make a better record for sure.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I actually think it would be interesting, given how much Andrew Klinko's done with Drab Majesty, given how much his production and electronic prowess has grown, because that band is really respected for their approach to like these saturated, very classic sounding Gothic records. It'd be interesting if these artists came back to that project, effectively collaborating almost like it's a new thing, but with all of the confidence and all of the learning that they've done in between. Because first of all, I imagine it would end up being a much more electronic project, but her performances would be way stronger on the vocal, and his production and maybe the directions they go in would be more bold.
Yeah.
So I think that would be an interesting thing, but it doesn't sound like it's going to happen. Have you heard of Headless Prince of Zolpidem?
No.
Headless Prince of Zolpidem is another of her alter egos. She's got one album under that title called Somnambulant from 2013. A quote that she said about it, my somewhat anonymous, down-tempo, somewhat creepy electronic darkwave project. The album is basically dark experimental pop mixed with electronica and ambient music. There's lots of vocal processing and production experimentation. I mean, like, to the extent of the vocals being sort of like DJ Screw, like really, like Purple Drank, which actually I kind of love. She originally wanted to explore this project more because it existed before Marriages was formed, but failed to, as she put it, find a sufficient audience. And also I think that a very expensive synth that she used for this project was stolen. It was really key to the process, and she wasn't able to replace it, so therefore the project fell by the wayside. But I think it's really pretty interesting. From what I've heard, I prefer the Headless Prince of Zolpidem to most of what she's released, being totally honest. It's a very interesting record, and yeah, maybe she will. This is one that, because it's just dependent on her, maybe it is something she'll revisit.
Yeah, I haven't heard of it, so that's and I did quite a lot of research. That's my 15 pages of notes.
15 pages, 15.1. That's what you're missing. So no, you'll get it on Bandcamp.
Okay.
Yeah.
Our Bandcamp is very extensive, to be fair. So,
it is, yeah, but this is one of those ones where it pops up under a completely different name, so it's not on her own named one. There's plenty of Emma Ruth Rundle, inverted commas, dedicated discography to get through, so we'll do that now. Yeah,
so one of the things I want to highlight as we go through this is that this is an artist that, I mean, I think some of the best artists reinvent themselves. I think she does that regularly, but I think a lot of the work that she does is also about excavating her emotions and using the power within them to create different versions of herself from record to record to record.
So we're kind of tapping into to the metamorphosis theme of last week again.
Yeah, pretty much. You know, I think there's a lot of quotes from the interviews for all the records, which I've kind of compiled alongside my commentary for them, which will actually give you a bit of an insight into that. Yeah, let's go through them. So
starting at the start, Electric Guitar 1.
Yeah. Yeah, so
2011, independent release, self-released, Ambient Guitar Works. Yeah, I mean, I think just off the cuff, I know you're going to go into quotes and stuff, but really interesting moment in her career and something that really distinguishes her from a lot of the other names that we've dropped. Chelsea Wolfe, to my knowledge, doesn't have anything as experimental or out there as this. And I think Emma Ruth Rundle seems to be the real deal in terms of her commitment to these exploratory projects. She really goes out on a limb with some of her releases.
Yeah, for sure.
She's willing to take chances on non-commercial things and shows a dedication to genuinely fringe musical tastes as well.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like there's some stuff we're going to talk about which is legitimately horrifying.
Yeah, I know the one you mean. I mean, I think like I'm not trying to do Chelsea Wolfe a dirty here, but I don't see Chelsea Wolfe doing something like this. I think by implication that kind of makes Chelsea Wolfe's image to me feel a bit stage managed, like quite guarded, like this is your brand, don't corrupt the brand. Emma Ruth Rundle seems a lot less concerned with perceptions of her brand. She's much more willing to deviate and take chances and go off in directions. Chelsea Wolfe's brand is pretty key to the model of what Chelsea Wolfe is selling. So I think Emma Ruth Rundle ends up on the back of that, it's feeling like a little bit more honest to me, a bit more authentically herself as a musician. This record reminds me a wee bit of Alan Sparhawk's early solo stuff, which is just guitar drones, often recorded live, very spacious, tracks that were 3 minutes, tracks that were 23 minutes, you know, totally varied.
She gets compared to Low quite often, actually.
Yeah, I can see that at this point. I think it's odd, because we spoke about this prior to the recording as well. Again, mutual friend really liked this album, and absolutely no offence intended, but
would not have pegged that.
If this album was released under the name Benny Badger and you had never heard of this person in your life and I just plopped it down on the coffee table, I was like, yeah, get that in your ears, I think you'll really enjoy that. There's no fucking danger that album was ever getting listened to from start to finish. And I think it's really interesting to see, once you're positively inclined towards an artist, how much, you know, latitude you'll give them, you know, in terms of going with them on certain journeys. So someone that likes Emma Ruth Rundle, they are bought into Emma Ruth Rundle, can find the space to appreciate it, when I really think it would struggle if they were just coming to it cold from someone else. I just think that's an interesting phenomenon. Like, I'm as guilty of it as anybody. You know what I mean? We're all so impressionable and so like kind of hackable in that way. So
a bit of background. This was recorded during the Red Sparrows EU tour in the fall of 2010. A quote that she was interviewed by Sargent House, and she said that
interviewed by her own label.
I spent a lot of time in the backseat of the van looking out the window and playing a little travel-sized electric guitar. It materialised as, and she says this in her Bandcamp as well, several meditative ambient improvisations which became one continuous piece of music about 30 minutes long. Now,
does not scream Mark to me.
When I read that, I want to die. It's just not my jam at all. She said that the spontaneous creation of it was actually really interesting for her, because she kind of recorded it over the course of 6 weeks to kind of get this like sort of loosely improvised 30-minute jam. The mobile studio was assisted by your lad from Ivis, Brian Clifford Meyer.
ISIS?
Yeah, not the terrorist group. No. She compares the drone heavy textures to Group Art Earth and their Club of Gore. Never heard of them.
Borm and their Club of Gore. I've seen them live. That was an experience.
I think It's actually really interesting because when she talks about being in Red Sparrows, she was like, I had never really played that kind of music before, but like effects then become really key to her sound as a player. But she says it made her a lazy guitar player because she didn't have to do super amounts of stuff to make it sound good. Yeah, the U2 effect. And this was like a kickback against that. It's her going, actually, I can just pull stuff out of thin air and just create, and I'm still a person that can actually make music. And I think it's very interesting that this is the first solo release by her.
Yeah, that's true.
You know, it's not an official album as such.
I get the feeling though, when this came out, she wasn't necessarily convinced that she was about to have a career under her own given name.
Yeah.
This was her first release well before the album proper that we're about to talk about. And I think she just put it out there by herself, thinking, I did this thing, I quite like it, I'm going to throw it into the ether.
She does that a lot. She does that a lot.
Yeah,
man.
well, I think there was less at stake when this came out. I think there's a lot more at stake in the subsequent releases of that kind that
God
she's
love
done. So, well, we talk about Some Heavy Ocean.
Some Heavy Ocean.
In 2014, came out in Sargent House.
Yeah.
Album proper, I think we'll agree. It came out, as you said, about the same time as Salome by Marriages, or Salome. Interesting album. I mean, I've heard this a few times. There's a couple of tracks that I think are particularly worthy of comment. The fifth one, Haunted Houses, is one of the stronger tracks.
Yeah, it's a great song.
The lap steel in that is swamped in delay and reverb, which kind of flies in the face of her wanting to not rely on that, but... And it's also got a decent pained chorus in it. And the sixth one, Arms I Know So Well, again swamped in ghostly reverb. I think it's actually interesting because it's a fairly solid acoustic song that would have worked with or without that sort of reverby approach. But the FX and that kind of niche seem to be where she's gravitating towards. She wants to do ghostly, sinister stuff that is actually quite atmospheric. And certainly being involved with the likes of Red Sparrows, I think the audience that she probably was encountering was more inclined towards that.
Yeah. So a lot of interesting stuff she said in interviews about this record, which I think is worth bringing up. So she said initially she wanted to step away from the Nocturnes band name and become like her own self and create her own compositions. And in Echoes and Dust interview, she said that I've spent a lot of time hiding or giving myself to other projects, and this was a good thing for me as it afforded me an incubatory period to grow a little and to be more comfortable releasing and playing my music in front of others. At the start, she felt it was frightening to move away from the Nocturnes and just do something herself. And she was like, I just had to start playing stuff and just let my emotional brain take over and just do it. And that's kind of where this came from. She's got this thing, which she often does, where she likes to do like a one-take live recording. And Living with the Black Dog is one of the examples of this in this record.
Always with always in silence, shocking like your toe, shocking.
She just sat down, turned on the tape machine, and that was it. It was just there. It's the most honest and direct thing that she had ever done, and she just needed the guitars and the lyrics to carry the emotion, which I think is a really powerful thing. On the Gothic folk thing, which I would probably peg her as that, so probably a good idea to talk about a little bit. So I think that this record, and even Mark for Death, are Gothic folk, right? We've done Marissa and Adler before, who I think is Southern Gothic, but there's I guess it's probably that Celtic part of her.
They've collaborated, have they not?
I think they have done. I think she's on one of her records. Yeah. There is that Celtic part of her, that initial folk upbringing, which she can never really get away from. But she's clearly started to absorb all this post-rock and post-metal. When we get to the Thou record, we'll talk about that, but she said she became obsessed with them in 2015. So like clearly she's starting to bring in all these disparate influences from the finger-picking, Celtic harp playing, acoustic guitar stuff that kind of transform her sound. And that's one of the things I find so fascinating about her career. She does that, and then she comes back to things which she maybe learned as a kid and moves through them. But on the Gothic folk thing on this record, she says that The songwriting process is really organic. Every song's got a meaning and each song's got a story, but the guitar helps pull that out of her. So that's where the kind of the Gothic thing comes from. It's not a deliberate choice. It's just that this is kind of how I feel as though my music should be. And she was saying that in the era, right? That opinion of how she creates music, certainly her own opinion of it, certainly changes as she gets older. And we won't really talk about Marked for Death until a little bit later on, but that's a bleak time for her, and it results in a very bleak record. In this album, Haunted Houses, great song. I like Shadows of My Name. Like, her voice is kind of wispy. The acoustic sounds really lush. It generally does when it's on this record. But there's loads of glistening guitars and stuff like that, and like beds of like reverby things, which is clearly a post-rock thing she's learned. You know, it's just come out of the blue, because there's none of that stuff in Nocturnes at all.
Yeah.
You know, it just becomes like a bed of sound, all these different weird guitar effects, and she makes that part of her approach to playing now. Yeah, and I like the song Arms I Know So Well as well. It's a fairly standard Gothic folk song, but the chord progression's a bit Celtic to me, and I really like the way the cymbal washes came in, and there's fiddle in it as well, and I love fiddle. So
she followed that with Marked for Death, which is 2016. We'll come back to that. Then there was the Time Between Us EP, which is a split with J Jail. In 2017, again on Sargent House. Now, this is 3 tracks by her and some tracks by J Jail, aka Evan Patterson, who was a member of Young Widows and also her husband until 2021.
Yep.
Her stuff is decent. His, I think, is fairly meh.
And I'll swim, but I won't dip. Can't swim at all. About time. About time.
It's a bit too country for
I don't
my
like
tastes.
J Jail. I'm not a fan of J Jail at all. I think did I maybe see him playing with Chelsea Wolf? Yeah, I was like, nah, this guy's not really for me.
I quite like Young Widows, but this is not that.
Yeah.
It's fine. Yeah. That is followed by 2018's On Dark Horses. This is quite a big moment for her.
Before we get into this, right,
okay.
I want to discuss something.
Oh.
So I think a couple of months ago we'd spoken about doing Emma Ruth Rundle, and you suggested this was the album. I don't know how au fait you are with her generally. I don't know if you've just been listening to her casually, but you suggested this was a record that maybe we should do, and I said Marked for Death. And then that conversation went away until, I guess, a couple of weeks ago. So is your opinion on this record that you think it is her best work?
Whoa, there's a twist in this. No.
Okay.
When I suggested that, it was one of a number of periods I've had where I've been trying to get into Emma Ruth Rundle actively. You know, sometimes there's an artist that you're like, I should like this. Like, I should be into this.
It's got everything, yeah.
And
you
so
would like, yeah.
actively trying to like, no, I need to revisit it. Something hasn't clicked, but it will click. I think like this is a really key moment for her because Marked for Death had a bit of breakthrough for her, and she had to build on and capitalise upon that momentum. So it's really important with this sort of time in your career where you suddenly are getting covered and you're suddenly getting these good tours to follow it up well, to not lose that momentum like so many bands that we've spoken about have. She's a bit of a sense of a brand now, I feel, looking at this album, and the album tries to double down on that brand. My initial impression, having gone back to it this time, is that actually in hindsight I find it really quite thirsty as an album.
Is it real? So nostalgic too. It just puts the dark on. Another sundown.
Her vocals use, I think, inoffensive, there's nothing bad about it, inoffensive but unremarkable melodic patterns, very narrow and comfortable range for her. The music kind of alternates between dreamy shoegaze verses and some quite oversaturated choruses that are sort of, it feels like sometimes those choruses are trying to keep her planted in that arctangent alternative gothy metal crowd. That's a festival in the UK for anyone listening from outside, but it kind of specialises in sort of Chelsea Wolf, Godspeed You Black Emperor, Melvins, and then Tesseract and all these kind of mathy bands. And I think she's trying to sort of keep a hand in with that kind of market. I think it's fairly mediocre ballady stuff. Without the production that this album's got, I think the music is on par with stuff that was happening and that I get sent it at work constantly, was happening in bedrooms across the globe every day. I think the release massively benefits from her existing buzz, a zeitgeist sound that was spoken about, which was very in vogue, some stylistic production, which is pretty good, that maximises a lot of it, and some very good marketing. I don't think it's a very good record. I mean, there are some moments. I mean, the third one, Dark Horse.
One little sister runs so fast to see she's gaining on you. Take a breath and make it last.
I feel I know what this track is trying to do and who it's targeting, more importantly. And I think you probably notice that I'm using some quite sort of cynical language like marketing, brand. I feel that on this album. I think this is targeting specific demographic, but it just feels so mopey and uninspired. Now, don't get me wrong, she's somber as an artist, but this feels mopey. That's pejorative, you know. Her vocal pitching and delivery pretty much throughout the record, but certainly in Dark Horse, is painfully similar, like monotonous, almost literally monotonous, and I actually kind of fucking hate it. The 8th track in this, When You Don't Have to Cry, is an interesting one to me because it's got much stronger hints of later era Cocteau Twins, which is someone she cites a lot, and I can hear it on some of the other records. I mean, I thought the Nocturnes stuff was actually very Cocteau Twins, but oh my god, so this closes the album. This is the last track, and the ending is so insipid. I really, really disliked it strongly. I think an uncharitable reading of the record is that the formula used in it is the least that she had to do to keep the existing audience satisfied. So whilst it's absolutely far from the worst music out there, given what I've seen that this artist can do when she really decides to go on an experimental foray, the complacency of this album, it makes me recoil. And it actually, this time around, having said that in the past, is this maybe the one we should be covering? I'm really, really glad we're not, because I've come to dislike it quite a bit.
That's interesting. So, background, she moved to Louisville, Kentucky, and she cites this as the first time she'd actually recorded in a proper studio with Kevin Ratterman, who is in her words, I don't know if you did with Music and Rights magazine, he was a reputable local producer and engineer, and there's so much about this record that really wouldn't have happened if she hadn't moved to Louisville, Kentucky. This record comes off the back of Marked for Death, which was probably one of the lowest points in her life. She says that this record's about overcoming. It's about understanding, embracing the crippling situation and moving beyond it. She says, to me, the cover visually encapsulates everything about her and her music. It's a broken ceramic black horse with missing legs, but it's still propped up somehow, so she kind of thinks that's how she sees herself.
Very gothy.
Yeah, at this time, yeah. She said recording with Kevin was really exciting. It's a really fun time. He's a really colourful person. He's just a really brilliant person. It's almost kind of 90s. It's like Midwesterny, shoegazy kind of vibes in some of the guitars, which I kind of get. That makes sense. The song Dark Horse is about overcoming childhood trauma. Control was about addiction, which was a big theme of the last record.
Yeah, and we didn't really mention that, but I did notice in some of her bios it discusses that she's had substance abuse problems since she was about 12.
Yeah, and that all comes to the fore in Marked for Death, which is one of the reasons why I think I've picked it. But yeah, like for her, the last song, Don't Have to Cry, offers hope. You know, there's goodness somewhere, and it's not worth getting all fucked up and twisted forever about some of these things that are happening. I think this record was a necessarily kind of complete reaction against the last one, and maybe mostly mentally the place she was in when she created it. We'll talk about that when we get there, because it was a pretty fucking messed up time for her when she was making Mark for Death. So this is like the complete opposite of that in a lot of ways. I think musically it doesn't move things on too much. I can see the 90s thing a lot. She's always said that Billy Corgan and Smashing Pumpkins are a huge influence for her, and I think you can hear that in this record.
Also quite a gothic band in their own way.
Very much so. Like, Billy Corgan's a big goth, I would say. I liked Control. It just feels a lot more direct. Like, I think one of the things that maybe Mark for Death, spoiler alert, can be accused of is it can get a bit unwieldy and a bit laborious at times. I think she's a lot more direct in this record. Control's a good example of that. It's a bit more alt-rocky. Dark Horse, you mentioned, I think that's a good song. Light Song for me was one of my favourite songs because it harkens back to Mark for Death, but it also kind of pretends some of the dread that would come with the Thou record, and probably more importantly, Electric Guitar 2, which is just full of dread all the fucking time.
Teasing this,
Yeah, and I think that's the best chorus in the record, and Evan's on that, so the creepy male backing vocal actually kind of helps. It's dead low underneath. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a fine record. I mean, I was a bit surprised listening to it there. Is Chris tripping? So I'm glad we didn't discuss that ahead of time, because that was a good revelation.
Yeah.
There.
So you've mentioned the Thou record.
The Thou record, which is the
2020, released on Sacred Bones. May Our Chambers Be Full / The Helm of Sorrow. I am already on record on a number of occasions as regarding Thou as utterly overrated as a band.
Yeah.
I think their USP is mediocre black and doom that sometimes wears trackies.
We saw them
at Stereo.
And they were very dull.
Oh, I thought they were fucking pish. And people were raving about it. And I was just like, my God, man.
I was only there for Betrayal of Guilt, who I thought were really good.
So this collaboration boosts Emma Ruth Rundle's heavy credentials at this point.
It also makes sense though, given how she's been moving sonically. Like,
I think that's the thing. She's maybe straying a little bit too close to a kind of softer mainstream, and this kind of hardens things up again. It's maybe savvy from a branding perspective, shall we say, but it's definitely what it's not. It's not Mariner, right? It is not Julie Christmas and Cult of Luna. It is not that. Wow, this is greater than the sum of its parts. It landed during peak COVID, October 2020. A lot of people were sat at home feeling glum. So her vocal lines are certainly more varied than they were on Dark Horses. Thank fuck. And she does go for some higher range and more animated delivery. And I think she sounds way better for it. But ultimately, I don't know that it's trying to be Mariner or something like that, but it just does nothing of a particularly high standard to me. It's fine.
Yeah.
It goes through the motions of sounding like this and looking like this and having these dynamics and getting the audience excited because Thou are sort of buzzy and she's kind of buzzy, and it's like, whoa, team up, wow. And it's just, to me, it's like, right, that's all like a product of like press release. How good is this record? I don't think this record's very good.
Well, I mean, your opinion's obviously in the minority because it was massively critically applauded.
Yeah, I mean, we'll put it this way, right? The second track on it, Monolith, right, for a record that is massively critically like lauded, that track is plain garbage. That track,
I really like that song.
That track would be embarrassing to a local band. What the fuck is that sung vocal on Monolith? That vocal is dreadful.
It's a key lower, which is odd.
I don't even know. I don't know what the fuck is going on with it. It's like an idea that you had for a song, and you would typically be like, oh, that doesn't work. It's inexplicable to me. The only one that I kind of warmed to was Ancestral Recall, for the fourth one on it, I think, because it had some really good riffing on it. It was the one where they actually had some great guitar lines.
Yeah.
But oh my God, man. I mean, yeah, fuck it. Some people will love this record.
Most people, apparently.
Everybody was involved was after some edgy points. I just do not think it's a very good record.
So, like I said earlier on, she said she'd been obsessed with the band since 2015. They actually collaborated in 2019 at Roadburn Festival, which led to the record happening. She said that the creative challenge of the record was really interesting. She plays in Dadgad a lot of the time, which is a guitar tuning, and she was saying that that tuning doesn't make much sense with what they play, so she couldn't always fall back and playing the same riffs and the same chord shapes. And also there's 3 guitar players in that band, so it becomes really difficult for her to try and fit in, and she found that to be a really interesting creative challenge, because how do I make this fit? You know, because she's not just going to be a singer, she wants to actually contribute musically to the music as well, which, you know, I think that makes sense. For me, though, we live in a time where Mariner exists and also Blood Moon exists.
Yeah.
And I mean, I like Ruth Rundle a lot, but she just gets smashed to absolute bits by both of those records.
Yeah. It is kind of sad as well, though, that it feels like a rite of passage that these gothier alternative female solo acts have to go through, which is team up with some heavy, blokey, raging band. And I think like the Julie Christmas Cult of Luna one felt strangely uncontrived. Like it was just a nice sort of random idea they had. The Blood Moon thing is a little bit more because there's all these other people involved in it, and it was like a separate project. But I think this is easily the weakest of those 3 by a distance.
Yeah. When I told Jason, who's in Rain, who you mentioned earlier on in this episode,
sponsor of Jamie Stuck,
that we were doing this episode, he was like, "Oh yeah, that record with Thou is really good." And I remember hearing it at the time, and I was like, "Nah, man, I'm not really feeling this."
I think sometimes people just say these things out of reflex because it's what's oh, everybody liked that. Eh? No.
I think Killing Floor's cool. It's a good bridge between Thou and Emma Ruth Rundle. Out of Existence is my favourite song probably on it, because it has, for me, the best guitar playing on it. It's got loads of cool guitar solos, good guitar riffs, you know. It's just a fun song, I think. But those are the only highlights for me in that record. Yeah. Like I said, if I didn't know that Marin existed and I didn't know that Blood Moon, which I think Blood Moon's fucking incredible, Chelsea Wolfe, Converge, Stephen Brodsky, and Ben Chisholm, who's also in Chelsea Wolfe's band, like that. If you're going to do that thing, that's how you do that thing. Yeah, that's just sad for her. Sad for fans, I think, as well, because you could have had that.
Clearly, though, the thing is, like, the press were completely on board, and one of the things that I'm just naturally averse to is when there is that sort of like uniform credulity towards something like this, and you feel like, you know, the Emperor has no clothes. You're standing there going, but he's naked, and everybody else is like, what are you talking about? Those are the most wonderful fucking clothes. And you're like, what, really? And it just feels like people are scared to break with the orthodoxy of saying that, and I don't think it's a fucking terrible album.
It's definitely not a bad record.
But the more it gets fucking like praised to high heavens, and in my opinion does not deserve it, the more I'm inclined to like really strongly push back to try and sort of like even that up. Yeah, I don't have any time for it, really.
So in 2020 she also released another record.
But hang on, that was 2022. Are you talking about Electric Guitar too? You're talking about Anhedonia?
No, the May Our Chambers Be Filled was 2020 because it was peak COVID. And then also in 2020 she released another record, which is Electric Guitar 2.
No, that was 2022.
2022? Okay.
Yeah. So in 2021 she released a single with Chelsea Wolfe called Anhedonia. And that should be a good pairing, and I think it's just okay.
It's fine. Yeah, it's not like, I think Chelsea Wolfe has got this thing where she did miss Piss as well, which is fine.
Yeah.
You know, and that was a drummer in our band, and she's a fucking great drummer, to be fair.
Yeah.
But it's like, well,
To be honest, I actually think this song is held back by the circumstances of the time, because this is clearly a lockdown thing, and the track constantly promises or sort of beckons explosive percussion. Like it actually has quite a nice melody, and it feels like it's about to erupt, and it can't, I would imagine, because they were recording it probably quite remotely in a minimal way. So it's got a nice vocal hook. It just never quite gets there, and I end up, the track finishes, and you're like, oh fuck, it didn't do the thing. Maybe live, there's a way that they've interpreted it where it could do that, and it would sound great. I can imagine that being really good, but it just feels like an anticlimax to me. Engine of Hell was 2021.
Yeah.
That was Sargent House. Incredibly subdued and minimalist compared to the prior album release with Thou. There's a very glum, I might add, short documentary that was released where she was, it was by Sargent House, released this little 15-minute thing. She describes feeling that stripped back music was just more powerful and impactful.
Yep.
I would disagree. I don't dispute that heavy does not necessarily mean moving. I mean, just see my discussion of the prior album, for example, but this is not a good example to counter that. The tracks like the third one, Body, feel like a vastly inferior Tori Amos release.
Come if you're able. Tears like the leaves fall down. Scenes from your table.
Many of the tracks in here do, actually. Many of them sound a lot like Tori Amos. I think Body in particular, the songwriting, the vocal pitching, the delivery, I mean, even the enunciation that she uses on it sounds like Tori Amos. And I say that as somebody that knows Tori Amos stuff quite well. Yeah, I mean, it was a 2021 release, and as we know, a lot of albums were suddenly very stripped back by virtue of necessity, you know, because the way people had to record them during COVID. But yeah, oh goodness me, I did not get a lot out of this album at all. I found it turgid.
So to All Press, she said that she wanted to just throw everything out the window and make a really bare bones, vocal forward, nothing to hide, warts and all album that's got fragility to it. There's no reverb on it, there's no effects at all. It's just a complete departure from what she's been known for. So it's her taking another creative right turn. So like I said at the outset, I guess she keeps breaking herself down creatively and building herself back up in different ways, which is a trait that I very much admire in an artist. Whether or not it always succeeds, I like the impulse regardless. And I don't know if you were crying, she said that she started to lose touch with everything that she was and all of her feelings, and she spent a long time trying to run away and push it all down. You know, she got sober when she was making this record. She got divorced as well, you know.
That's
so
right,
she said, the more you uncover, the more their corpses reveal themselves. I was excavating myself, like soul retrieval, and trying to find my history again. This was the most punk rock thing I could think to do, which I kind of fuck with that, man, because you're going from the massive thunder of doing a heavy record without to going, actually, it's just me and the piano. The piano itself is actually very interesting because she started playing that when she was young and then discarded it and she just came back to it. And I think that actually, I don't think the piano playing is very assertive when she does the guitar stuff on the record. I think that's better. But it's just really cool to see her reconnecting with that instrument and feeling her way through that. And a lot of this record was live.
The piano thing, it just strengthens my analogy, though, or my comparison to Tori Amos. That approach, coupled with the vocal and stuff, it really does just sound like a lesser version of something that already exists.
Yeah, I mean, maybe you're right. I mean, I didn't think it was amazing, but I did like the whole ethos behind it. I think some of the songs are really, really good. I like Blooms of Oblivion.
I will stand over you to breathe in your vapor as pieces and parts they desire.
Which is just
such a goth title.
Yeah, it's got an almost grunge quality to it, I think, in the vocal, and it really builds quite nicely and slowly. And then she brings in her falsetto, which I think is a very nice thing. I actually quite liked Body
mostly for the male harmony that came in and underscores her voice, which I think is a really lovely touch. That song is actually about her grandmother, who actually taught her how to play piano, which is pretty sweet. And
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to shit in your grandmother, but it's not a good song.
I like Citadel. It's got really good guitar work, and the live recording of it really helps bring it to life. You can hear the sliding on the frets and the creaky of the guitar and the chair and all that, and it's a really naked and bare thing. I like that vibe of this record. It feels vulnerable. I dig that.
So let's talk about a really interesting record. Now this, you may be right, maybe it was 2020, but I've got it as 2022. Sergeant House, Electric Guitar 2 or EG2, Dowsing Voice.
Not on Spotify. You got to find this in our band.
This is gnarly as fuck.
This is one of the wildest things.
A follow-up to Electric Guitar 1. So the track you sent me when you first discovered this, track 3, In the Cave of the Cailleach's Death Birth. Yeah, it's pure Robert Eggers Ari Aster patter, isn't it? I mean, I feel like, so she'd recently done the soundtrack to the film Duel, like Duel, Dual, starring Karen Gillan, and I feel this actually sounds to me like an abandoned soundtrack, or like something that she'd been working on for a film and for whatever reason it didn't go ahead and she liked what she had. But regardless whether or not it is that, it feels like it's putting her in the shop window for consideration for more potential soundtrack work. I think obviously she's got a history with Sacred Bones. They've got a lot of history with putting artists onto soundtracks. It works really well for them. And especially COVID era, a lot of these artists were actually trying to find soundtracking work because it was a financially stable thing they could do even in these times of big disruptions. So just kind of looking at how the sausage is made a wee bit and knowing people that have done that at that time, that's the impression I get from this album. But that's not a criticism though. I think the album is trippy, it's dark, it is very consistent with an artist of integrity. Mm-hmm. And it's not a lot of fun to listen to at all. But again, it's one of those moments where you're like, right, okay, so some of these other people we've referenced would never have done this and jeopardised the consistency of their catalogue and therefore their brand by putting this into that. Yeah. Now, fair enough, it's not on some services, so I think there has been an element of people saying to her, going to not put this between your two proper albums, but still it's there if you go looking for it, and it's interesting. It's very interesting.
So the story is that she went on a trip around Wales and got really enamoured by, she likes Celtic music and really enamoured by that, so pretty much I think all the track titles have got Welsh words in them.
Yeah, but Cailleach is actually Gaelic. It's a Scottish and Irish word.
Well, yeah, and probably also Welsh as well.
It could be Welsh, although the Welsh language is not the same as Scottish.
Yeah, I mean, there's some words in here I'm not going to try and pronounce because they're so fucking Welsh. But yeah, the whole thing gives me Robert Eggers vibes for sure. The second track, keying it into Fiann Llanwa.
Good fucking luck, man.
It sounds like an ancient hymn being sung around a campfire. It's absolutely wild. It's got a really warm atmosphere to it. Embolic Dawn atop I'm not even going to say the name of that peak because I don't even fucking know, but it's got loads of Y's in it. But the track ends with ice melts as the first resplendent rays of spring pour over the horizon. That could fit into any one of Robert Eggers' films. It's just pure horror. And yeah, And the Cave of Calic's Deathbird is genuinely fucking terrifying. Actually terrifying.
That is a mental track.
It sounds like a demon being born.
Yeah.
It's insane. It's all raspy vocals and heavy breathing. The track after that, Gathering Around Perdineni, is pretty scary just because of the vocals.
Do you remember, sorry, you ever watch Game of Thrones?
Yeah, well, the first season.
Alright, so you won't remember when the Red Witch gave birth to the demon in the cave?
No, that's probably the track.
That's what it reminds me a bit of.
Yeah. That song Gathering Around Perdinoni actually has got like chittering teeth and stuff in it. It's wild. Yeah, this is completely improvised and it sounds fucking completely improvised. She's got a history of doing improvised vocal sounds on the first electric guitar record, although definitely not as extensive as in this one. But yeah, this is a wild choice. It's a huge swing.
I mean, I really hope, given the strength of it and the ability of the music alone to really unnerve, I hope she gets picked up for a soundtrack. I mean, I think there are horror films that would benefit from soundtracking that's as evocative as this. So good luck to her with that. She then released Engine of Hell live at Roadburn from 2023. Boring but live.
Yeah.
Should have been the subtitle. If I was standing through that performance after a long day at a metal festival, I would seriously fucking struggle. That is dull.
Maybe it's just there for you to chill at the end of that festival.
No, man, that's not what I'm looking for.
Soon learn that the company I keep is just mine. It's the center of my trouble.
Wasn't impressed.
Okay. And then we move on to a more recent release.
Music from Bella Vista, 2025. I mean, I feel like I'm watching this in a back room at the Tramway Theatre.
Yeah.
Spoken word, avant-garde stuff. The fourth track, Kite, known as Hope, is like spoken word, vocal fry American poetry. It's pretty right on, man.
Whose bitter black horses painted wide and riding, who is buoyant in a blind and perilous sky. The mountain pours mountain down the clouds.
There are actually some really committed and commendable performers doing music like this, for example, in Glasgow right now, who I have a lot of respect for. Bell Lungs would be one. I appreciate the bravery and willingness to explore sounds like this. Unavoidably, it can come across as a bit pretentious sometimes. I also just find that sometimes I cerebrally can appreciate it, but actually don't particularly enjoy it. There's plenty of nice sort of amorphous piano textures and drones. If you're into that kind of thing, I would probably use this as another illustration of Emma Ruth Rundle's sincerity as an artist, dedication to the craft. And I do think actually the originality and unusual nature of it, the bravery of it, probably by default makes it a more interesting album than, say, On Dark Horses or Engine of Hell. Because it's just more insightful even of her as a person, I think. I know those albums are trying to be insightful, but certainly with On Dark Horses, I saw way too much self-branding, brand maintenance. And Engine of Hell, I just found boring. And I think was the result of the circumstances of COVID, whereas this, 2025, it's unprovoked, it's natural, I assume. You learn quite a lot about her from this that you don't learn necessarily from those other records, even though they claim that they're very raw.
Yeah. So she released that book of poetry called The Bella Vista this year. And this is...
That's right, she did, yeah.
There's the improvising piano music and field recordings to go around that particular collection. She spent 2 years working on The Bella Vista. It is described by her publisher as an expression of tenderness and the brutality of romantic love. It's an addiction memoir. It's a family tree, and it's a love letter all at once to music, to mistakes and humanity, to cross-country drives and other artists, and the long road to finding oneself. She says that...
I thought it was just like nice noises.
No, the actual poetry collection.
Yeah.
Written on... Okay. She wrote it on the road over the course of a year. It's part of partly travel log, partly love story.
Oh, that makes a lot more sense then, yeah.
And partly a journal of dark existential reflection. I mean, most of your music is dark existential reflection, but I'm glad you've put it on paper. I haven't read it. It got some critical acclaim from people who know about poetry. I haven't read a lot of poetry over the last 10 years. I still have some favourite poets, but I don't read it very often. I'm certainly not au fait with the contemporary scene. But nonetheless, interestingly, on the streaming sites, it's broken down into individual tracks, right? But there's actually only 2 tracks on Bandcamp, side A and side B of the record.
Okay.
The first side is A Kite Known as Hope, and the second one is At the Tomb of St. Francis, which are the names of songs, obviously, in the collection. I found it quite difficult to parse. There's some nice melodies to be found in it. Obviously, I quite liked Helium Velium, just some nice playing in there. Ivan's Dream was pretty cool. It's got an almost kind of loungy 50s feel to it, which is nice. The King of Etheria, Dog the Bitch of a Woman, reminded me of some actually quite contemplative neoclassical music, maybe Satie, something like that.
Right.
Yeah, I think I like the atmosphere of it because it's clearly just recorded in a room with whatever's fucking going on in the room. It's completely improvised again, you know. I do wonder if she's maybe just tired of actually writing music.
Yeah,
you know?
I also just think give this woman some film work because she's definitely up to the task. Mm-hmm. It needs to be the right stuff, right enough. But yeah, I mean, it's got a lot of potential, but I didn't consume it in conjunction with the poetry.
I imagine it works.
But well, this is the thing. This kind of music, decontextualized, like you're just sitting in a cafe listening to it. You're like, what am I doing here? How do I navigate this? But in the context of a film with a narrative or poetry or something like that, then yeah, I can see it being quite profound and moving. So this leaves a Mark for Death.
Mark for Death.
Mark for Death. A name supposedly partly inspired by a condition she suffers from that affects her uterine wall and can be extremely painful. It's not endometriosis. It's something else. Something similar, yeah.
Okay. That fucking sucks.
It does suck.
Let's get into this a little bit. So it's widely considered to be our masterpiece, this record.
Is it widely considered to be our masterpiece?
Apparently so. It comes from her darkest period, and she actually recorded it at Sargent House's Desert Retreat. She said in an interview with them, the place was very bleak, very isolated, and not at all luxurious. It's called The Farm.
Sounds like a hospital.
Yeah, she said she was there in the winter and it was below freezing. It's in the high desert and you can see the mountains from there. You can also see Joshua trees. You can just walk out on these dirty roads and it's the kind of desert that's just full of garbage but also full of beauty. She would drive to the store occasionally, stock up on tons of booze and cigarette, and then she would just sit there by herself every day, write music, get, in her own words, absolutely fucking wasted. And then there was a point where she just stopped leaving the property. It was just a really, really bleak
I don't know how responsible that was by Sargent House.
Yeah, I mean, she said to Sargent House, like, I've struggled with alcohol and I've struggled with drugs in the past, but being out there alone in the desert, getting drunk all the time, smoking cigarettes, all of her relationships in shambles, she hit a point where she started to go numb. But then she had a moment of clarity. She was like, I'm not actually going to die, but I'm actually going to live, and that's all right. Like, it's okay to keep on living.
Probably good news for Sargent House.
Yeah, so 10 days. She was in there for 10 days, and the guy, Sonny, the producer, was very present for every step of the recording, but she sees it as being a lot of defeated love songs and a lot of self-loathing, alcoholism and flames. So that paints a really bleak backdrop for what is a very bleak record.
Yeah. Starts with the title track, Marked for Death.
It was right that we did see each other in our shadow sides. It was wrong to the crazy love's crazy as it does. And each of us in both.
Subdued but decent wee track. Made really interesting by the guitar sounds, especially in the chorus, because it's both quite clean yet dirgy. Really reminds me actually of bands like True Widow, who have a very deserty vibe to them, where it's both heavy and not at the same time. And again, Low perhaps would be an example of that.
She is good at doing that, to be fair. I liked how it was quite doomy and downbeat at the same time, and it's not full of distortion, but it is heavy. So I agree with what you said there. It's still got those country elements though, fiddle, slide guitar. It actually really expands the sonic palette for the last album, which is what I really appreciated. Yeah, it's a really good sense of dynamics. This record tends to lean on those dynamics quite a lot, but I'm glad that she explores them to their fullest extent in this record. The second one is Protection. I found a bit of a PJ Harvey vibe in the vocal.
I didn't get that, but I think it's probably her most memorable song overall for me from like across her career. There's more good use of dirgy guitars without them sounding metallic for the chorus. Nice falsettos on the vocal, you mentioned that earlier on, and good dynamic vocal lines that move a lot and have some really nice shapes to them. Much more interesting songwriting for me than a lot of her other stuff.
Yeah, for me the song's got the vibe of like walking drunkenly through rainy back streets. There's a lot of textures on the guitars. The cleans are really reverby without being cavernous. There's a lot of kind of thickness without it being really scooped and horrible. Everything just sits really nicely in the mix. It's probably a bit too long. I could really do without that last verse and that last chorus. But I think overall, I think it probably is our most recognisable song, probably the best. It's not the best song on the record, it's the second best song on the record, but it is probably one of our best songs.
Medusa, third one.
Yeah, I figured out who she sounds like. Dolores from the Cranberries.
Interesting.
And she actually covered a Cranberries song on the Thou record. The EP was released afterwards.
Okay.
But yeah, her voice really reminds me of Dolores. My favourite thing about this song is the doom country vibe and just the really creative use of reverb and delay on it.
I much prefer her vocals on this general period, to that on the later work. I think it's the lines are just much more interesting and varied, but it's not a huge song for me at all. It didn't really stand out. Likewise, Hand of God, the fourth one, pretty forgettable, total skipper.
Yeah, I was saying that, it was actually around about this point where I started to wonder if I'd picked the wrong record, because I don't remember this song being on there. I don't remember all the songs having such a similar vibe, but given the context for the record, there probably was only one vibe in her head, so that's fine. I don't mind the chorus. It's got some really haunting guitars, and it sounds like there's a huge reverb tank buried somewhere in the mix. Yeah, interesting.
Heaven, the fifth one, a bit lighter, tasteful use of reverb on the acoustic guitar, nice vocal line in it, nice delivery. There's a subdued string thing in it that I think is really well judged. They don't over-egg it. However, you actually mentioned this slightly earlier on about grunge. She does have a very slightly Eddie Vedder-esque mumblegurn at points here.
That's interesting because I get that from Ryan Adams, and this song reminds me of Ryan Adams quite a lot, particularly in the vocal, but it just in its overall general old country vibe. Yeah, particularly the record Ashes and Fire, which is where I get a lot of the similarities from.
Okay.
When it kicks up around 2 minutes 30 and shakes off those comparisons and becomes something else entirely, which I quite liked. Big washes of dirty guitars and her vocal goes up an octave. It's I think that's a really good choice in that song. The next song is So Come.
swampy, boring, lowest plays on the streaming services, and I think that the slow tub thumping approach to the drumming in this one really doesn't help it.
Yeah, it's quite a plodding song, but I don't really mind it so much. I like that the song gets louder for the first time. It's like quite a loud song in places, which kind of helps with the general overall vibe of the record. But yeah, it's also maybe get the closest thing resembling a vocal hook apart from Protection.
Furious Angel, the 7th one, and after a strong start, I'm really starting to fatigue with this album. Again, using beaters on the toms, so it's really sort of soft and dark.
If you have me, oh, bring me alive. For furious angel, rain death from above.
Lashings of reverb and chorus and delay. You said she was seeing Joshua Trees, which is definitely a U2 parallel here. The guitar becomes something of a kind of Cocktail Twinsy wash, but the vocal itself isn't strong enough or unique enough to elevate it in the way that Liz Fraser would.
Mm-hmm.
The Cocktail Twins could have these very amorphous, nebulous guitars, but then you'd have this brilliant delivery and really well chosen lines coming through it. This doesn't have that, and actually it just feels very safe at this point, like it's settled into a pattern, and it's easier to just stick to that rather than do something that could rock the boat.
Yeah, I mean, I actually found this song quite hypnotic. I like the way the vocal melody repeats the same melodic phrases over and over again, so you kind of get sucked into it. The more I listen to it, the more I kind of feel that this is maybe one of my favourite songs, because I feel as though I'm getting enveloped by it every single time. The post-rocky guitars, I think, are quite captivating, and there's some really nice lead guitar lines. But for me, the best song on the record is the last song, Real Big Sky.
Real Big Sky. It's got a really interesting kind of down-tuned nylon guitar tone, a bit like Something in the Way.
And it's either peaking or it's going through a good distortion pedal or something like that, and I think that it really helps with the overall feel of the song, because it's a really fucking dark song, and it almost moved me to tears the first few times I heard it.
You have always tried. I can watch you sleep.
I just think there's something about the...
Do you ever watch a drama, or you're probably too young for My So-Called Life?
Never seen it, no.
Party of Five?
No.
Dawson's Creek?
My sister liked Dawson's Creek, but I never watched it.
Right, okay. Well, this... I mean, the production is way cooler and more alternative, but musically this feels like it could have been something on Dawson's Creek.
Wow. I just love her voice on it. I think the vocal melody is great. I just like how bare and passionate it is, that I don't want to be awake when it takes me, but I can't wait to see you smile on the other side. Just fucking flays my heart every single time, man.
You big softy.
I know, it's brutal stuff. Like, I think I hadn't really fully reckoned with that until I was listening to it the other day, and I was like, fuck, man, that actually just gets me. I don't know why, but it's definitely about somebody that's dying or dead, or that she knows, and she's sitting next to their bed, and I've been there. That's horrible, you know what I mean? And I just kind of, the big emo cunt in me is still big and emo.
Absolutely. Your final words in this?
So have I picked the right record, really, is the question I was left with. When I was cleaning through the discography, it kind of made me realise that maybe On Dark Horses actually sits with me slightly better now, but maybe it's where I was at this point in my life. Maybe it's because of the person that recommended it to me, but I still have a huge amount of love for this record.
2016, you were still a year out for starting a podcast that would consume it all your fucking free time.
Whole life, yes. For me, this is a record that's kind of halfway point in her career, and it really feels like that. It does lean deeper into goth, like I said, like you mentioned earlier on. It experiments with different noises and different textures. You know, as I said, she was in a very low place when recording it. The atmosphere permeates the record, and I just like the fact that is I mean, it's obviously shite for her, but I like the fact that that's a chronicle of being stuck in this horrible place. And
there you go, Sargent House. Horrible place you've got there.
Well, Sargent House are not a good label these days, so is it her best record? I'm not entirely sure. Does she have an unsung record in her? Maybe it is a Maggie record, I don't know. Maybe I need to go back and revisit that. But for me, I still like this record, and I still kind of back it. And I think she probably gets overshadowed by the likes of Chelsea Wolfe, you know. So I think in her own way, she's maybe unsung.
Thanks to regular experimental projects and releases, I think Emma Ruth Rundle has established
fascinating artist.
Her legit credentials as an artist, like an artist in the sense of being an artist and not just a self-aware brand for the most part. And that's actually, unlike some that she's often classed alongside, debatably, I think that allegation could be levelled at Chelsea Wolfe these days. She was part of a wee movement and has benefited from a sort of gravitation, a kind of darker pop thing gaining traction in general. She also had, as we mentioned, some metal credentials that gave her currency in that scene. There's nothing wrong with that, but you know, coming out of Red Sparrows, their associations, she had a foot in the door of a music scene, a heavier music scene, and I think some of her production decisions and creative decisions were influenced by that, and I don't say that as a criticism. What I do say as a criticism is in terms of output, she has periods of what feels like either creative drought or just pandering. Records that to me are like, this is probably enough to get away with this and this is kind of what people expect, which doesn't really sit well given that she's so brave at other times. So I find her quite confusing in that sense. Ultimately, is Emma Ruth Rundle just quite dreary? More often than not, yes.
That's kind of part of the appeal though.
I think you can be sombre. I mean, goodness knows what a fucking enormous fan of Low I am, going all the way back to their darker stuff, but Emma Ruth Rundle is not low. She's dreary. And I really want to like her, but with some exceptions, I've realised that I just don't. This is not an unsung classic, in my opinion, and she is unfortunately not the artist that I was hoping she would be if I just kept digging. I think actually her most interesting work is the most bizarre work that she's done, and I very much hope she does more soundtracking because I think it sounds like she's got so many interesting ideas in that field. I just don't need to hear the really quite predictable,
the sadness,
down-tempo, sad kind of goth pop stuff.
Well, that sucks for you, man. I'm sorry for putting you through that, but I enjoyed it as much as it's possible to enjoy it.
Yeah, enjoy is a qualified term.
Yeah. I'm glad I got acquainted with her whole discography and at quite the pace as well.
I'm glad I can put it to bed now because, as I said, multiple times I've gone back to it going, I must just be coming at this for the wrong angle. Like, I'll get into this. I will get into this. Well, I don't think I will.
Well, our most recent records have been left turns. So who knows what she's going to do next? You know, there was, I guess, Engine of Hell, Electric Guitar 2 and Music from the Bella Vista are all odd compared to everything else she's done. So she clearly likes to just, you know, mess with the expectations and just follow her own muse, and I think that's very, very commendable.
I'd like to hear her get marriages back together, and especially kind of post Drab Majesty, let's hear what they come up with. I think that could be interesting. I think the Marriages record is much more interesting than most of the stuff we've just talked about.
We'll find out, I guess. But anyway, yes, thanks for listening to us talk about that.
Next week
we're doing Anti-Rock.
The Anti-Rock mixtape. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, this has had a few weeks of build up to it. We've got Ferruccio on as a guest, and he is a font of knowledge, thank goodness, because there's a lot to talk about. But Anti-Rock, what does that suggest to you? It's not like dancing to Wigwam Bam.
To me, it suggests out of tune guitars and melodies that don't make sense.
That's not a terrible guess.
Yeah.
It's going to be an interesting one because I think anti implies a knowledge of but a reaction against, and that's what I think makes it so interesting.
Mm-hmm. I'll be the judge of that.
You will be. I mean, I don't think you're going to have a fun time.
I doubt I will.
But I think you're going to have an interesting time. Mm-hmm. It's just a week of your life, Mark.
That's fine. It's fine. Thank you for joining us. Like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. Patreon.com/unsungpod.
And any goths out there that want to come at me, then you now know our location, the Variety Bar in Glasgow. Thank you to Gail and Sean and the staff of the Variety for letting us use the studio.
You need to guess what night, but I mean, there's only 7, so.
Oh, okay. What wards off goth? Garlic?
Dance music.
Fuck with that. TTF are playing soon.
Techno.
The only place I'll be safe at the Hydro for TTF and Technotronic.
Thank you. See you for the Anti-Rock next week. Goodbye.